Hi, I think this was an issue that was maybe tiptoed around by the other questions in front of me, which is that in the case of politics, it's easy to make solutions that are very, I guess, general and abstract and sort of sweeping ideas, but it's easy to lose sight of the fact that you need specific policies to actually change things. So I was wondering if you had any specific things that you supported in terms of pointing things in the direction that you were advocating.
Well, I tried to make the point early on that you don't read Niebuhr so you can get the 6 steps that can get you out of the Iraq War. But if you're asking me, do I, rather than Niebuhr, have a plan? The answer is yes. I only got about 2 minutes, and I gave a 40-minute talk at Amherst on Thursday night. It was a talk. It was not a lecture. And so I'm going to try to compress that 40-minute talk into 2 minutes. We won't be able to determine the future of Iraq. There may not even be an Iraq. It may be a fiction, which we can thank the Brits for. The war is militarily unwinnable. We need to extricate our combat troops with all due speed. That's not cut and run. That's call General Petraeus on the phone, tell him his mission's changed, ask him for a plan about how he's going to withdraw. To the extent that there may be some smidgen of hope that the Iraqi government is going to get its act together, I personally have my doubts, but to the extent that there's some smidgen of hope, then it would make sense to leave behind a force with a train and equip mission as opposed to a combat mission. Once it becomes evident that that smidgen of hope no longer exists, then we should completely cut our losses and remove all support and all participation in that country. Now, there will be those who would say, oh my gosh, my golly, don't we have a moral obligation to the Iraqis? And the answer to that question is, A, we have no moral obligation to the Iraqi government. We have a massive moral obligation to the Iraqi people. But the way to meet that moral obligation is not to continue with the war that has visited upon them such misery. It rather is to divert some of the resources we are using for the war in order to alleviate their suffering. There are something on the order of 2.5 million Iraqi refugees that are in Jordan and Syria and other places. I don't know how much it costs to maintain 2.5 million people on a daily basis, but I dare say we could take some of the $4 billion a week that we are spending on the Iraq war and divert it to that purpose. Or, this is my favorite idea because it gets all the anti-immigrant people squirming. If we have a moral obligation to the Iraqi people, then let us offer them sanctuary. Let them come to the land of the free. I don't know how many Iraqis would take us up on that offer. 500,000, million, 2 million? It's a big country. We've got a tradition of welcoming immigrants. And that would go far, I think, towards discharging our moral obligation. That's what we should do about Iraq. Now, what should we do about the threat of of violent Islamic radicalism, which is real? It is real. Well, we should rethink this whole notion of a war which is intended to prevent another 9/11. We should rather recognize that we got 2 problems. The one problem is Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, the people who are actually engaged in using violence against us and our interests. And there, frankly, we have no choice but to go find them and kill them. But that's not a task for the 82nd Airborne Division or for F-16 fighter planes. It's actually a task primarily for intelligence agencies, police forces, assisted by special operations forces. So let's take another chunk of that $4 billion a week that we're wasting, and let's reprogram it in order to refocus our intelligence effort on the people who are actually trying to kill us. Finally, there's the question of the Islamic world. These 1.4 billion people. I have a have a crazy friend in Canada who, I don't know who this guy is. He sends me long emails. He has read half the books ever published, I'm convinced. And one of the things that he has told me in these long emails is, and I think it's the beginning of wisdom, we must let Islam be Islam. Islam is following some historical trajectory of change. And the people of the Muslim world who are devoted to Islam ultimately will decide where they are going. It is as preposterous for us to claim that somehow we are going to redirect or shape the Islamic world as it would be for Osama bin Laden to say that he is going to redirect Christianity along some path. Christianity has changed radically over time. Christianity will continue to change. Christianity has some kind of historic destination. Let the Islamic world figure out where it's going to go. In the meantime, we want to make sure we try to insulate ourselves from any spillover that may not be friendly to us, which implies the need to devise a strategy of containment that is not like the strategy of containment we devised during the Cold War, but has the same effects. And my last point, when we think about the strategy of containment during the Cold War, of course, it wasn't simply about containment. It wasn't simply about trying to hold in place the threat of Soviet communism. On the margins, on the fringes, it also saw an effort to nudge that part of the world in a certain direction. Never more than on the margins, to try to encourage change within the Soviet bloc that actually might lead to the Soviet bloc either becoming more benign or ultimately failing. Never more than on the margins. But the strategy of containment has both a negative aspect, but also a positive aspect. We need to think through what the strategy of containment ought to be, and that's the alternative to the global war on terror. Thank you very much.